Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
So, hello, welcome to a very special episode I'm recording today. I have the honor of hosting Dr. Zimmt with me. He is an expert on Iran at the Institute for National Security Studies. He holds a master's degree and a PhD in Middle Eastern History from Tel Aviv University and was selected as an Alison Baker Research Fellow at INSS. He's the author of the book Iran from Within, State and Society in Islamic Republic, published in Hebrew in 2022. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start the conversation by asking it's a very basic primer that I wanted to ask you, since most of our audience here from India doesn't understand the implications of the Iranian threat, because Iran and India has shared a good relationship in the past. So if you could tell our audience a little bit brief about what the state of Islamic Republic of Iran is and the theocracy that governs the state.
Yeah, well, my short reply would be that since 1979, Iran has been ruled by an Islamic theocracy, in which the supreme leader of Iran is actually a high-ranking cleric. And that certainly has an impact on its policy, both domestic policy, but mostly in its foreign relations. Some of you might remember or know that actually until 1979, Iran and Israel had quite a good relationship before the revolution. There were diplomatic ties between Iran and Israel, and there was also cooperation in different areas between the two states. But following the revolution, and that's perhaps one of the main changes which occurred after the revolution, was that Iran has shifted its policy in many areas, but especially in regard to two main issues. One is its position, its policy toward the United States. Iran and the United States were allies before the revolution. After the revolution, relations were cut, and actually the animosity towards the United States is one of the main pillars in Iranian policy. And then another area in which we could see a major shift in Iranian policy was its policy towards Israel. Now, it's important to understand that while Iran has adopted an anti-American policy, but it has more to do with the position or the policy of the United States. Its animosity towards Israel is not based just on Israeli policy or behavior, but actually Iran doesn't recognize the state of Israel. It calls for the elimination of the state of Israel, and therefore all areas of threat coming from Iran, both in its regional policy, its nuclear program, are certainly considered by Israel as a main threat.
And this is where I actually want to ask you follow-up on that we have seen a lot of other Islamic countries as well in the Middle East, but very few have advocated for a complete annihilation of another state. What was there in Iran when it first came, as the current trauma with the Ayatollahs actually, that they wanted a complete annihilation of Israel from the map of Middle East?
So actually Iran, and unfortunately it's not just Iran, it's also other Islamist movements in the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza. They all share the same ideology, meaning that Israel cannot be accepted. It's not just a matter of, as I said before, it's not just a matter of opposition to Israeli policy. It's not a matter of territorial dispute between Iran and Israel. There is no territorial dispute. It's actually the ideology which doesn't recognize the Jewish people's rights to exist. So when you ask Iranian officials about their position towards Israel and about the Jews, they will always say, well, we have no problem with Jews, but we don't recognize Jews as people, only as religion. And therefore, the Jews have no right for self-determination, certainly not in this area of the Middle East. And therefore, it's while other Arab countries in the region, even if they're Muslim, of course, were ready along the years to accept Israel as a reality and even to normalize its relations with Israel, the ideological issue in Iran is still very much intact, and they are not ready to change their policy towards what they refer to as the Zionist entity.
And this is where I want to bring, since you mentioned about the proxies, actually. I mean, it's a supposition for a long time. I think after the attacks, there was an article by the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, which directly points out that Iran was behind the planning of the recent Hamas attack. Of course, the Americans have actually denied a direct linkage. But I want to ask you, to what extent is Iran directly involved in the recent Hamas attacks on southern Israel? And what evidence suggests an Iranian participation? Because we have seen a series of meetings between Iranian officials and key figures like Hassan Nasrallah, suggesting a structured plan of approval leading up to the attacks.
Okay, so I think some of the confusion following those reports, some of them said that Iran was directly involved. Others said that Iran was not directly involved. And I think that some of the confusion stems from the fact that one needs to distinguish between two things, to separate things. One is the Iranian continued support to Hamas, which Iran has never tried to hide. Iran has, over the years, and especially over the last few years, has actually intensified its deliveries of technology, of know-how, of training, of weapons to the Hamas in Gaza. And certainly, I would say that Hamas could not have carried out such an attack without Iranian support when it comes to training and technology and capabilities delivered by Iran. So this is one thing. Another thing which has to do with that is that we know that over the last 1 or 2 years, there have been frequent coordinations between the different elements within the so-called axis of resistance or resistance front led by Iran. So, for example, we had many meetings carried out occasionally in Beirut or in Damascus between the commander of the Quds Force of the Revolutionary Guards and officials from and commanders from the Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, etc. And of course, it's very likely to presume that at least some of those coordinations dealt also with concrete operations planned by the Hamas, for example. Having said that, I think it's important to realize that this kind of what is sometimes called as the Iran threat network or the Iran proxy network is not a command and control network. So it doesn't mean that Iran controls everything which is carried out by Hamas or even by Hezbollah or by the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. It's not a situation in which Ismail Haniyeh, the commander of the leader of Hamas in Qatar, or Yahya Sinwar, the military commander of Hamas in Gaza, are waiting for a phone call from the Revolutionary Guards commander in order to carry out the attack. So my sense is that Iran was surprised by the specific timing of this operation. It might have not been updated about the details of this operation, but to say that Iran was not involved, that's of course something else. Iran was involved, perhaps not in the tactical meaning, but certainly with supporting Hamas in a way which could enable Hamas to carry out this attack.
And the reason actually a lot of people have mentioned Iran's possibly involvement was because either the Abraham Accords was going at a good pace and there was a certain sense of normalization of relationship between Saudi and Israel for the very first time. And that would be a major progress in normalization between Arab and Israel conflict, actually. And the other reason was actually this was to actually shift away distraction towards Israel while Iran can actually continue its nuclear program. So does either of these two issues make sense while Iran would choose to actually help Hamas in this attack at this point of time?
So again, my sense is that Iran did not decide upon the timing of the operation. About the interest, well, we have again to distinguish between the basic roots of such an operation, which, by the way, the planning of this operation probably took at least a year. So one cannot link this operation just to recent events such as the normalization or the talks for normalization between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It started even before that. The timing, in my view, could have had something to do with several issues, including the normalization talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, or the concerns within the Hamas that the Palestinian issue should be returned to the agenda of the international and regional community, as well as some of the policies carried out by the Israeli government and the concerns among the Palestinians that the Israeli government has planned to annex some of the West Bank, for example. So all those were perhaps the immediate reasons for the timing. But again, I have to. But one has to remember that the operation was planned a long time. It has to do mostly with the ideological issue, mostly by the Hamas, with, of course, with some overlapping interests between the Hamas and Iran as well. But the timing itself has, in my view, has nothing to do with specifically with Iran. Certainly not with the nuclear issue. The nuclear issue, I would put it separately. In my view, it has nothing to do with the timing of the operation.
And moving on from this, actually, you initially mentioned about Hezbollah and Hamas, some of these regional groups which have been supported by Iran. So what kind of support does Iran provide to Hamas and other regional groups such as Hezbollah? And how do you characterize this relationship between Iran and these proxy groups? Is it hierarchical, or do they have autonomy to do what they would want to do?
Yeah, so that's a very important question, and I think we have to say at least 2 or 3 main things about this network of Iranian proxy. One is that it's certainly not an hierarchical or centralized network, which means that Iran certainly is coordinating the efforts of all members of the axis of resistance. It gives support to those elements. But it's not a matter of command and control. Even when Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the Revolutionary Guard Quds Force, was still alive until he was assassinated by the Americans in 2020, this network was more about coordinations and support, and not about Iranians giving orders to all those groups. But it certainly is such today. So this is one thing one has to say about this. The second thing is that, yes, this network of proxies sometimes, or most time, have overlapping and similar interests to that of the Iranians, but they are certainly not identical. And we know, for example, that even Hezbollah, which is perhaps the most committed element within the axis of resistance, and certainly Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, considers the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, as his source of emulation from the theological, religious point of view. Even Hezbollah has to put into consideration not just the Iranian interests or the Iranian agenda, but also other issues. For example, the public opinion inside Lebanon, the economic problems of Lebanon, the positions taken by the Lebanese government, if there is a government. So, but that certainly is correct about Hamas. Hamas, we have to remember, is a Sunni organization. It has always tried to keep as much independence as possible from the Iranians. So despite the support and despite the assistance given by Iran, there were even incidents in the last decade where the interests of both sides were not the same. For example, I don't know if you remember, but following the civil war in Syria in 2011, Hamas actually supported the Syrian opposition against President Bashar al-Assad. Or following the Saudi military attack against Yemen in 2015, again, Hamas did not support the Houthis in Yemen, unlike the Iranian position. They supported Saudi Arabia. So those interests are similar, but they are not identical. And the last, I would say, characteristic of this network of proxy is that it's not equal, meaning that the commitment, the level of commitment, the extent of commitment between the members of this network and Iran vary. So, for example, the commitment by Iran to Hezbollah is much higher. Hezbollah was actually built by Iran as its main strategic front to deter Israel and even to retaliate to Israel in case of Israeli attack against the nuclear facilities inside Iran. Hamas, again, Iran is very much committed to Hamas, but not at the same level, and therefore it's important to understand that, because if we reach the stage or the phase in which Iran has to choose between, for example, sacrificing Hamas, I'm not sure that it will be ready to sacrifice Hezbollah, which is considered by Iran as a much more strategic and much more important element within the resistance front in comparison to Hamas. And that, of course, has to do also with the level of support. So Hamas certainly enjoys Iranian support, as I said before, technology and weapons and know-how and training, but it's not like Hezbollah. Hezbollah is much more dependent on Iran. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, which is a much smaller organization in comparison to Hamas, is also much more dependent on Iran. Hamas, for example, financially has received most of the money from Qatar, not from Iran. So the relationship between Iran and the different components of the so-called axis of resistance vary. And
if I could summarize this, so Hamas doesn't have even a sort of a religious similarity. It's a Sunni organization which comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, and Iran is a Shia. But what unites them, is it the ideological underpinnings of taking down the state of Israel? That's one that I want to ask you. And the second thing what I want to ask you is, as you're mentioning about choosing between the two, actually, if Hamas actually goes on to a full-scale war as it is right now, Iran is not that inclined to join the conflict as Hezbollah might be, right?
So concerning your first question, you are right. Hamas is a Sunni organization. Now we have to remember that Iran has no problem to support Sunnis. This is not the first time Iran has supported Sunni organizations. The PIJ, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is also a Sunni organization, and as I said, it's very much dependent on Iran. But certainly, Iran is more comfortable with supporting and having a better relationship with Shia organizations such as Hezbollah, such as some of the pro-Iranian Shia militias in Iraq. It's much comfortable for Iran, and it has more the same ideology. But as you said correctly, the ideology of the battle against Israel and trying to reshape the Middle Eastern order according to the ideology of anti-Zionist, anti-American position are probably the same between Iran and other elements of their proxies. Concerning your second question, well, this I would say is the $10 million question. What will Iran do in case of Israelis accept to eradicate Hamas and to put a major threat on the stability and the survival of Hamas as the sovereign in Gaza? Basically, until now, what we've seen is that although Iran is of course very much committed to Hamas and tries to help Hamas, and it has even supported some kind of limited or restricted involvement by the Hezbollah in the northern part of Israel, but we still have not seen full-scale mobilization of all members of the resistance by Iran to support Hamas. Probably right now, because it has no reason. I mean, Iran still believes that Hamas has the capability to confront Israel by its own, with some restricted support either by Hezbollah. Perhaps in the next stage, if Israel begins its ground offensive, then perhaps we will see more involvement by the pro-Iranian militias from from Syria, from Western Iraq. We have already seen an attempt carried out by the Houthis in Yemen to launch missiles against Israel, which was failed due to U.S. support. But the question might be, what will happen if Iran reaches the conclusion that there is a real threat to the survival of the Hamas? Our assessment and my assessment is still that it will not be an easy decision by Iran, because Iran knows that in case of a full-scale confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel, that might put in danger not just the Hamas capabilities, but also Hezbollah's capabilities. And as I said before, unlike Hamas, Hezbollah is considered by Iran as the more important element within the resistance front to deter Israel and to react to Israeli possible activities against Iran. So this will not be it will be a very difficult decision, especially due to the support given by the United States. Iran should be very worried with the possibility of U.S. involvement against Hezbollah and even against Iran in case of a full-scale confrontation between Israel and 2 or 3 fronts. But I can't rule out the possibility that in such a moment in which Iran gets the impression that Hamas is going to collapse, then perhaps it's going to be very tempting to Iran, and it might decide to use more capabilities against Israel. Now, I don't think that Iran will be directly involved in a confrontation with Israel, for example, by launching missiles from Iran to Israel. Iran is always prefer to work through its proxies, but the possibility of engaging Hezbollah in a full-scale war with Israel, although it seems less likely, but I wouldn't rule it out completely.
This is where I actually want to bring a little attention. Moving on from that, I will come back to Hamas and Hezbollah as well in the later part. But there has been a certain sense of eschatological belief, actually, of Iran, which is very important to understand for our readers, that it's been said that an army of black banners will rise from Khorasan and it will go and erect their flags in the Alaska. How much of this eschatological belief permeates through these proxy groups as well, where Iran sees them as their own army to carry on this mission?
Well, I saw that there are slogans, of course, and of course there is a kind of religious, perhaps even messianic angles to this Iranian confrontation and its attempts to mobilize the Muslim world against Israel. But we have to always to remember that while the revolutionary ideology and the vision of getting Israel out of the map and the annihilation of the state of Israel it certainly played a major role inside Iran, and certainly among the leadership of Iran, and particularly with this current supreme leader Khamenei. But over the years, we know that Iran's policy, even concerning issues as Israel and the United States, were not entirely based upon religious or ideological vision. And Iran is ready to take some risks, but up to a certain level. So if my sense is still that with all due respect to ideology and religion and its attempt to mobilize the Muslim world, still, if Iran reaches the conclusion that it might suffer a major blow to its own national interests, for example, by Israel acting severely against Hezbollah or forcing the United States to interfere, then I'm not sure that the Iranian calculus will be that which will make it engage all its proxies to work against Israel. It's not just a matter of religion. It's not just a matter of ideology. It's also a matter of national interest and strategy based upon Iranian pragmatic calculus. And
this is what I want to ask you the next question, actually. Is it an Iran's appetite to actually engage in a conflict, direct or indirect, with Israel at this point of time, because it has warned Israel if conflict escalates to Hezbollah in Lebanon, it might want to join the conflict. So what are the potential risks and dilemmas for Iran if it chooses to escalate the conflict further? And what has been the international response to Iran's involvement in the conflict?
So I think there are four stages we should follow. The current phase is Iran not being directly involved in the confrontation, and it certainly encourages some members of the resistance front, mainly Hezbollah, to be engaged in a quite restricted, under the radar of full-scale confrontation with Israel to intervene. So this is the first stage. The next stage, which could come perhaps if Israel begins its ground offensive in Gaza, might be to use other elements within the resistance front. For example, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, in Syria, and to try and engage them as well. The third and perhaps most severe and most significant phase would be engaging Hezbollah in a full-scale confrontation with Israel, which actually means that Hezbollah will use not just some of its capabilities, but its whole firepower, mainly the more than 100,000 rockets, which could be aimed against the state of Israel. As I said before, this might come only if there is a scenario in which Israel succeeds in carrying out its directive and its objectives of eradicating Hamas. This is the only scenario in which I can think that Iran might take this risk and ask Hezbollah to act. And then the fourth and last stage might be an Iranian direct operation against Israel. I think it's very, very unlikely because, as I said, Iran has to think not only about the interests of Hamas and not just about the interests of the resistance camp. It has to think first and foremost about its own interests. And if Iran concludes that in case Iran becomes directly involved in confrontation with Israel, this will lead, even in potential, to involvement either by Israel or even worse, and to a U.S. decision to target some to hit some targets inside Iran. Then I think Iran has no interest of doing that. Iran has various ways of retaliating and engaging in a confrontation with Israel without using its own capabilities, but to fight through the Palestinians, through the Syrians, through the Iraqis, and through the Lebanese themselves.
So my last question to you is actually this conflict actually that we see between Israel and Hamas. What is this potential of this ongoing conflict against Hamas leading to a broader regional conflict, especially into a multi-front confrontation involving Hezbollah? As also Houthis, we have seen firing a few missiles actually a few days back, which were taken down by the US. So what are the chances of this actually engaging into full war confrontation with multi-front confrontation? We have seen Hezbollah has been a little hesitant, probably testing waters before it wants to get into full-scale conflict. Some mortars exchange, some infiltration, but not a proper full-scale conflict that we have seen so far. So what are the chances of Hezbollah entering the war?
So I think there are two main scenarios we should follow. One is a scenario in which nobody really wants, neither Israel nor Hezbollah wants to be engaged in a full-scale confrontation, but we might get there even if nobody wants that due to miscalculations. So, for example, if Israel continues its responses to Hezbollah actions, and if some of those actions and some of the retaliations, either by Israel or by Hezbollah, had a more significant impact. For example, if Israeli civilians are are killed in such a Hezbollah attack, then we might certainly find ourselves in an escalation in which nobody wanted, but it could happen. The second scenario is a scenario which has to do with an initiative, the decision made by Hezbollah to engage itself in a full-scale confrontation, and that, as I said before, I see that as less likely, certainly at this point. But we could get to a point in which Hamas is under major existential threat by Israel, and then perhaps Hamas would ask Hezbollah and Iran to put more efforts to try and limit what Israel is doing in Gaza. In that case, I think it's more likely than today. But still, again, the main question will be whether at that point Iran, and this is mostly Iranian decision, although of course Hezbollah will be part of that. But the main question being asked in Tehran will be whether it's worthwhile to risk and to so-called waste the capabilities, the strategic capabilities of Hezbollah for the sake of the Palestinian Hamas. So on the one side, they could say, well, if we don't do that, this will show the weakness of the Iranian camp, and this might be the end of Hamas as a sovereign, as a ruler in Gaza. But on the other hand, they might come to the conclusion that we are, in any case, we are going to lose Hamas as the sovereign in Gaza. We should not risk our most important element of deterrence against Israel, which is Hezbollah. So we cannot rule out any possibility, but I think that right now, and even in case of Israeli ground offensive, as long as Hamas is capable of dealing with Israel mostly by itself, I think the risk for overall confrontation is less significant, with the exception, of course, as I said before, with the possibility of miscalculation either by Hezbollah or Israel.
Yeah. Well, that's all the question that I had, sir. Thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us. You have shed light to one of the most critical aspects that a lot of our audience might have confusion. The Iranian question in this entire conflict. So thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us.
Thank you very much.